Well, good evening and welcome to Sunday Night Live. And our special guest this evening is Archbishop Timothy Dolan, Archbishop of New York.
Good to be with
good
you,
friend.
Father Benedict. Thank you for the invite.
And we're very delighted. And we had dinner together in the seminary. And I want to mention that next week our visitor will be Father Richard Holung, very well-known missionary down in the West Indies, has started a religious community, the Missionaries of the Poor. Some time ago, you had Father Holung on our broadcast, and he'll be in this year, next week with Father Charles. And it's an extremely interesting program about two brand new martyrs, two of their brothers, Brother Cyrus and Brother Marco, who were shot to death right in their house, their monastery, right through the door. And you'll hear the story and how they are really martyrs. This evening, we're very interested to talk with my boss, Archbishop Dolan, and to talk about vocations to the priesthood. You know, there has been a decrease in the number of priests over the years. And the priesthood has been attacked in many ways, I think, by the powers of darkness and attacked through human frailty. And people realize, many people, that a great majority of priests are very loyal and loyal to their vocation, loyal to their vows, but people hear and talk about the failures. So, Archbishop, give us some ideas on this.
Well, you know, Father Benedict, thanks be to God, I think there's a hints of a new springtime when it comes in the realm of vocations. All we've heard is dreary news for decades and decades and decades, which might be part of the problem, if you ask me. I mean, who wants to buy a ticket on the Titanic? You know, if all you're hearing is that the church is sinking and the priesthood has had it, who's going to sign up? But things are beginning to look a little good. You've been teaching at St. Joseph's here in Yonkers for the last 45 years. And, you know, things are looking better now. We've got, especially in our college program, our St. John Neumann House of Studies, we've got 54 guys. Is that tremendous? And you talk about a bench for the future. You talk about a strong minor league club. And altogether, we've got 102 seminarians next door at St. Joseph's. So, hallelujah. I hear equally good things from my home diocese of St. Louis. They're building rooms at Kenrick Lennon Seminary. My good friend Cardinal Justin Regali in Philadelphia says they've just welcomed a big class. My alma mater, the North American College in Rome, they had, Father Benedict, you know, long time ago, because the numbers of seminarians were down, they had taken the first floor and turned it into rooms for priests who were in Rome on the sabbatical program. Great program. But now they had to say to the priests, sorry, we got to find you other rooms outside the seminary because we got to reclaim those rooms. They got 245 men at the North American College. So there's still, I mean, listen, it's not time to pop the champagne corks because we need a lot more than we got. But I think the good news is that we've bottomed out and we're starting up. Now, you know, because it's come out in this program before, that there's not a vocation shortage when it comes to the church in the third world and the church in the mission countries, the church in Africa. They're busting at the seams with vocations to the priesthood, to the consecrated religious life. It seems to be a first world phenomenon. I don't know enough about Europe to know if they're experiencing the beginnings of a springtime in vocations there or not. Have you heard anything?
I don't know anything.
But here in the United States, I don't think it's too naive to say, hey, things are beginning to look good. That's a credit to the fidelity of our people. You know what a rector told me, Father Benedict? He thinks this could be the fruit of the year for priests. Because all over the world, people had accepted the invitation of Pope Benedict XVI to pray for priests and to pray for an increase in vocations to the priesthood. And why should it surprise us that it's working? So that could be. That could be. Whatever it is, thanks be to God, huh?
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yes, and you and I, as priests for a long time, myself more than 50 years. You how many years?
Mine, I had my 34th anniversary in June. So
we've been around.
We've been around.
And we've seen it come and go.
Yeah, and that's always true in the history of the church. It used to irritate me because, you know, I'm a church historian by training. When you'd have these chicken littles who were saying, oh, it's a terrible crisis because the number of priests has gone down. Well, whenever you look in the history of the church, it's kind of a roller coaster.
Yes.
I sometimes wonder if what was extraordinary was the great abundance of priests in the 40s and 50s and early 60s. That may have been the blip on the radar screen, because when you study our bishops from John Carroll on, they're always begging for priests. They're always looking for new vocations. They're traveling abroad to find other priests. So the challenge that we've got in attracting, recruiting, maintaining good, solid vocations, that's always been part of the church, don't you think?
Yes, obviously it is.
Do you agree with this? Somebody told me, Father Benedict, that we know that Jesus called 12, but how many did he have to call before he got 12 to say yes?
There were a number of them left.
Yeah. So, and you wonder how many he called that said, sorry, I got other things to do.
When he spoke about the Eucharist.
Sure.
They didn't follow him. And if they didn't have to do for him, it's not going to happen.
Not for
plain old bishops.
That's right. So, although the direct involvement of a bishop is really essential, you'll find, I think, savvy people have kind of done studies on dioceses and religious orders where there is a springtime of vocations. You'll always find, at least when it comes to diocesan priests, that if the bishop is aggressively involved, if he's part of the vocational recruitment, you're going to have a good vocation program. So.
Sad to say and unpleasant to mention, in the 70s and 80s, the issue came up of the ordination of women. Mm-hmm. It's a very legitimate question. Mm-hmm. One of the favorite women of all the world said she wished she was a priest. Mm-hmm. St. Therese of Lisieux. Mm-hmm. She said that. But that didn't mean she was expecting to be made a priest.
No, or thought it was her right.
And women were thinking that they would like to be priests. And the role of women had changed immensely from the 18th century to the 20th century.
Sure.
You know, there were no well-known women writers, except the saints, St. Teresa and St. Catherine. But the first, a great English writer who was a woman, had the name George Sand. She wrote under a man's name. And she had the same thing. All of a sudden, the role of women changed dramatically, and for the best.
Sure.
Absolutely for the best. And then the question would come about women being clergy, and gradually into some of the Protestant churches it became known.
That's happened, yeah.
Yes, and women even being in the leading place in the church, which is no problem with those churches. And now you have a number of women in certain denominations of Judaism. You have women rabbis. Mm-hmm. So the question came up very legitimately about women being ordained priests. And it's a very hot issue when you bring it up. But my answer is, I think with the church. And
Sure.
the Pope said that this was not going to happen.
Sure. I presume the reason you brought it up under the chapter heading of vocations is you're wondering if that was one of the factors that kind of chipped away at the stability of the priesthood,
yes,
and caused a decline in the number of vocations. And I think you're right. Add to that the ceaseless debate about celibacy.
Yes.
And add to that, let's face it, from the close of the Second Vatican Council up at least to the pontificate of John Paul II, which began in 78, there was a period of mass confusion and turmoil in the church. Now, all those things join together because, look, our young people like to hook up with something that is going to be successful. They're not necessarily easy or convenient, but they want something that's stable, that's hopeful, that's promising, that's strong. And for a while, the perception of the church was anything but that. You and I have quoted before my good friend Archbishop Edwin O'Brien, the Archbishop of Baltimore. He said, young people will give their lives to an exclamation point. They won't give their lives to a question mark. And that's what we had, a question mark for a long time in the life of the church. That's been replaced by an exclamation mark. I wonder even if what you hinted at the beginning, Father Benedict, the terrible crises, I wonder if in a way God is bringing some good out of that. What you've seen is young men saying, it's tougher than ever to be a priest now. It's not easy. You're going to get harassed. You're going to be ridiculed. You're going to be the butt of jokes on the late-night talk shows. But that appeals to them, that sense of courage and fortitude. You know, this is now something going to fight for, our faith and our church and Jesus and his people. This is worth giving our lives to. This sort of demands almost kind of the same reason a young man would join the Marine Corps. You know, darn it, if something is not worth living for unless it's dying for. And there is a sense of dying in the priesthood. So maybe all of that. Maybe the Lord is bringing... Spring only happens after the death of winter, right? The lifelessness of winter. So maybe this dying and the lifelessness and kind of the turmoil and the clouds of the last years are now breaking forth. I hope so.
Well, I hope so, too, because in my old age, I want to see things looking better.
We got to get 10 guys to take your place. How are things with the Friars of the Renewal? What do you with vocation-wise? How are we doing?
They do very well.
What about religious life? Are they
Well, some religious orders that are traditional and loyal to their traditions are doing well. The New York province of the Dominicans.
Yeah, did you hear that?
There are 21 novices.
Yeah.
Fine boys. I know some of them.
Yeah.
And then other communities.
They're Dominicans now, right? Yeah. You knew St. Dominic, didn't you?
Oh, I knew St. Dominic personally. I avoided St. Thomas Aquinas. He was too smart, you know. But one of the things that you notice, though, some of the orders of men and great numbers of orders of women, those huge, wonderful orders of teaching sisters, nursing sisters. I went to school to them for 12 years. I went to the
Me too, yeah.
And those communities have shaken. However, there's a few old ones that kept their identity, like the Nashville Dominicans, and they grow. They're growing. And now there are the new orders of sisters, like the Sisters of Life.
Hallelujah.
And some of our sisters, who are here, these young sisters in the front row, are sisters of our community. And they're growing.
Yeah.
And I think you're going to see some growth in some of the larger orders that seem to be confused or doing better.
Have you ever heard this theory? You know, people like to say, "I wonder what caused the downward trend in vocations." And sometimes we look for real elaborate reasons. You and I have just talked about some the last 10 minutes. I sometimes wonder if there's practical reasons. I'll give you a couple. One, the decline in the sacrament of penance. If a young man was going to confession once a month, as was kind of expected if you were in a vibrant parish and in a Catholic school when we were growing up, sooner or later a priest is going to say, young man, you've made a darn good confession. I can tell you're trying your best to be holy and to live the kind of life that Jesus wants. Have you ever thought about serving him in his church as a priest? All right, with the sacrament of penance in decline. All right, number two, grandmas. Grandmas were a tremendous source of vocations, weren't they? You'll always hear priests say, their grandma was a great source of encouragement. I was just back at the parish church of my grandma for the 150th of the parish, and I remember sitting in that front pew and saying to her, Nani, I want to be a priest, when I was 3 years old, all right? Now, grandparents don't live in families anymore, right? Yeah. They're on their own, thank God that their health is good, or they're in homes. So do they have that influence anymore? And number three, you just referred to one, the decline in the number of sisters in our grade schools. What a gift they were, and they were always a source of encouragement. Can you remember the sisters saying, how many of you boys would think about being a priest? And if you knew what was good for you, you better raise your hand. But I mean, that was a simple way of encouraging vocations. Those three things now aren't as stable as they used to be, and I wonder if that's one of the reasons, three of the reasons. Well, I don't know.
We're going to have a little break here for 30 or 2 minutes, and we'll be right back. As we're talking about people coming into the priesthood, I think we should also mention a little bit about the vocation of sisters. In the days when we were growing up, there were immense numbers of sisters in the Catholic Church. I went to school to the sisters. I got my vocation to be a priest in the 2nd grade from a sister who's a canonizable saint.
Second grade for me, too.
Second grade.
She's coming to visit, because they're from Ireland. Sister Mary Bosco, and because the relics of Don Bosco are coming, you're going to cover that in a show in a couple of weeks. I invited her over for the relics. So she's 85 years old. She's in great health. Thank God, a Sister of Mercy from Ireland. Tremendous impact on me. You're right.
Well, our Sister Teresa Maria in the 2nd grade was the kindest, gentlest soul in the history of the world, and a canonizable saint. And nobody said to me, why don't you become a priest? But her good example, and I went into church to make a visit to the Blessed Sacrament, and I'm kneeling there, and I said, you're supposed to be a priest. I'm supposed to be a priest. But I wanted to be a fireman, be a priest. So there I was. Had to be never made it to be a fireman. Now, those
you had a direct voice?
No, it wasn't a direct.
I was going to say, have you ever talked to a psychologist about this?
No, but it was. I could still see it. It was so clear because I wasn't thinking of being a priest.
Yeah.
Be a priest.
Wow.
And I didn't know.
It's interesting what you just said, Father Benedict. When I was rector of the North American College in Rome, I used to enjoy reading the spiritual autobiographies of the new men. Almost always, there would have been a direct experience of encouragement for the priesthood before the Blessed Sacrament. When they were praying, especially in Eucharistic adoration, they would feel, again, not a hey, you be a priest, because we wouldn't have taken a guy like that if it was that sledgehammerish, but a whisper and just an impulse almost that this is a good thing, this is where I want you, give it a shot here. No, you're right, the power there of the Eucharist.
And though also was the very good example of very good priests.
Yeah, in the parish.
When I was growing up, I didn't know any religious order priests. I knew entirely diocesan priests. And they were very, very good men.
Remember when the order priests used to come in to give vocation talks? I don't know if you would have that. We'd have Marionollers, we'd have Passionists, Franciscans would come in. But I remember when I told Sister Bosco, and this she taught me again later on, and I said, Sister, I really do want to be a priest. And she said, well, what kind? Because all these orders had been in it. And I said, well, just the kind that Father Callahan is. He was our pastor. He was our parish priest. And that's the influence of the parish priest, huh?
And when I finally...
Did you have Franciscans in your own parish?
No. I never saw a Capuchin until... I didn't even know what they were. I went to the Holy Name Parade, and all the priests in those old days and the officers of the Holy Name Society wore high hats and swallowtail coats and carried shillelaghs. This was the old days.
Wow.
Every parish, except this one parish, and this was a kind of sloppy-looking group of guys in brown robes and sandals and beards. And I said, I don't know who these guys are. And
looked like the Luden brothers cough drops
they were
or something.
right from Italy. They were Italian cappuccini. And I asked my priests in the parish, and they all went to confession to
the Caps.
The old Capuchins, including the Archbishop.
My, oh my.
And there was a very famous one, Padre Norberto. And the old Archbishop used to come with his chauffeur every week out to the monastery, Orange, to confession. So supposedly the new Archbishop said, Father Norberto, could you come in and hear my confession? And he supposedly said, Excellenza, you be Archbishop, you come to Orange. You be Pope, I go to Rome.
God bless him. You know, to this day, I go down to confession because I think it's part of it. Could I have a confessor come to the house? Yes, but I think the going there, standing in line with the people is a good thing. It's a good practice for me. There's a kind of a penitential pilgrimage aspect to it. Yeah, I like that.
You're another poor sinner.
You bet I am.
We certainly do that. Yeah, we all know that. But.
You know what? See if you agree with me, though. You know, when we talk about vocations in the church, all right, we've talked about priests, we've talked about sisters, we should never forget the brothers either. Isn't a fundamental one marriage? Marriage. Now, you talk about some scary statistics, Father Benedict. You and I just talked about at the beginning of the show how, thanks be to God, there's the beginning of a springtime in vocations to the priesthood and religious life. Now, I think what we're worried about are vocations to lifelong, life-giving, faithful, sacramental marriage. The Pew Center tells us that only 50% of our young Catholic people are approaching the sacrament of marriage. Well, where are vocations going to come from if we don't strengthen that one, right?
What's scary is people who wait a long time before they get married, living together. But that's the fear of this time.
What is it, you think?
Oh, it's because marriages are unstable.
Yeah.
And people aren't
So they don't want to
sure.
repeat mistakes, you mean? They see so many mistakes around them?
After it works, they do it. And unfortunately, the law of the church and the law of God does not permit that. But I do think that many eventually get themselves to be quietly married by the church.
I was reading an article a couple of weeks ago on the airplane where they said, too, and I thought, this guy's onto something. The age of adolescence is now postponed.
Oh, sure.
When my mom, I think, was 20 or 21 when she was married. My dad was 23, 24. That was normal, right? Today, good Lord, I think somebody told me the average age of marriage in the United States is 32.
Oh, my goodness.
And I think more and more couples are putting it off. Yeah. And so that the age of maturity is being postponed. How many kids go right from college now into a full-time job where they'll spend the rest of their life as a career? Not many. They're jumping around, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm not faulting them, but I'm just saying this is a cultural trend that militates against marriage, commitment to the priesthood. Another good point. You've seen this statistic. I, for one, rejoice in it. The age of our young men entering the seminaries is going down, which is great. I mean, from a bishop who's dealing in actuarials here, that means we're going to have him a longer time, all right, in service to the priesthood. But it's easier to farm a man when he comes into the seminary for college, isn't it? Yeah. They're more farmable. I guess there are some advantages, you know, when a guy comes in his 30s or so, and thanks be to God, a good number are doing that. But I thought for a while that was maybe a little too much trumpeted, and I'm kind of glad to see the age going down a bit. I don't know. Are you noticing that?
Well, I think what it is, Archbishop, is it's subtle rebuilding in the belief in the priesthood.
Mm-hmm.
Somehow or other, and I'm not quite sure, a confidence of people in the priesthood. We've been attacked, from many sides, and a number of priests badly failed in their vocation. Some just left and got married. That's the least of the problems.
Sure.
But the other scandals and things like that. But what you begin to realize then, if you've got the Savior, the guys who saved, you've got the guys that got through the battle.
Sure.
They came home from war.
I love those guys. When I look at our priests, in their late 60s and 70s, when you see what they went through, and they looked at a lot of their classmates who left, and they miss them, and those guys labored on. Those guys fought the good fight, and we can't forget them.
Actually, they're not so much in the 70s. Things didn't change because we were ordained in the 50s. It was the fellows after 68.
Yeah.
68 was a year of world revolution.
Yes, it was.
Not only in the Catholic Church, everywhere.
Politically, socially, economically.
Communist China and Russia had it.
Sure.
And they had it all over Europe. Christopher Dawson called it the world revolution. Yeah. And there was every place a revolution. And in the church, it caused people unsure of themselves and things like that. But it does seem at present, I hate to say it so loudly, we're going into bluer skies.
Yeah, yeah.
We're looking.
You knock on wood and you light candles and you don't give up praying, but I think you're onto something.
Delighted some of our sisters here tonight, of our community here tonight, young sisters, that you're starting to see new communities or old communities coming back to life.
Yeah. You know what I notice too now in the Archdiocese of New York? I find, because you know how I love St. Patrick's Cathedral, and I try to say Mass there every morning at 7:30 and on Sundays at 10:15. I will meet a remarkable young number of young men and women who are in New York as the great promised land. Okay, they came here, they're 23, 24, 25, they're right out of college. They think if they come to New York, they're going to be hired on Wall Street, or they're going to be hired for a Broadway musical or something. After a couple months, they're frustrated. They're settling for something less. And there's a restlessness there and a searching that is a good thing. First of all, it's a restlessness in searching for God. The very fact that they're there at St. Patrick's, I see them praying. I see them in line for confession, believe it or not. And then that's, I think, a fertile field for vocations. These are people who had a dream. They're willing to cast out in the deep. They left home. They've come to the big city of New York. And yet there's still a restlessness. There's still a searching. Not bad for vocations.
The statistic, Archbishop, that every ordinary day, 7,000 people pass through St. Patrick's Cathedral.
Yeah, and thank God most of them light a candle. We count on that.
But some are just tourists.
Yeah. St. Patrick's is a place of prayer, though, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
There's a sense of awe and transcendence. It's not a museum. Even some of the great churches of Europe would almost seem like a museum, even though they try hard to keep it a house of prayer. St. Patrick's is always prayerful.
And the other Midtown churches are beautiful. St. Francis, St. John's.
Oh, are they ever?
St. Agnes.
Yeah.
A number of others. Our Savior.
They're great. I love the churches in Manhattan.
And the people love to pray there. As a boy, I did it myself.
Did you really?
Oh, yeah. I had to go. My mom was sick in the hospital, and I used to always go after she was in the hospital several months. And I went always to the cathedral and praying there. It's a wonderful thing in this great big city that the world thinks is very worldly. It's filled with people.
Father Benedict, bingo. New York, the perception is it's pagan central, right? I mean, if you looked in the yellow pages under paganism, you'd see New York City. That's the perception. I find it deeply religious. I've never been anywhere, Rome included, where people will greet me on the street. Hello, Father. Hello, Father. How are you? Where the number of people at Mass. You know our stats for Ash Wednesday at St. Patrick's. 50,000 people come for ashes on Ash Wednesday. Confessions constant all the time when we have our Eucharistic adoration. That's New York. Yeah, is there the other extreme? Sure. But you always see where sin abounds, grace abounds all the more.
What's interesting in New York, as an old New Yorker, that many of the people who may come are not Catholics.
Yeah.
And they'll sit down or kneel down. I think my great Ash Wednesday story, though, these crowds with ashes. What old lady I know, she's Jewish. I said, "You're Jewish. Why did you come for ashes?" She says, it's free and it can't hurt. It can't hurt.
God bless her faith. By the way, happy holy days to our Jewish neighbors.
Yes.
And I so admire our Jewish neighbors who make their highest holy day was Yom Kippur, which is a day of penance and atonement.
Yes.
My oh my.
Instant Lent.
Yeah, sort of condensed Lent. Yeah, bravo! What a beautiful. They teach us, especially in line of the Scriptures today at Mass, with the need for mercy and acknowledging that we're sinners. Good Lord, we learn something from our Jewish older brothers and sisters.
As a New Yorker, I never thought of New York not being a religious place.
Yeah.
Everybody else thinks that, and they think New York is a wicked city. Yeah. No, it isn't at all.
When I go to, when I meet waiters, cab drivers, people on the street, bartenders, they'll always tell me where they grew up, where they went to Catholic school, what their parish was. Yeah, and they'll identify where they grew up by their parish,
yes,
see?
Of course.
So there's a real Catholic tie there. It really is. And, of course, the policemen and firemen. My Lord. Yes. They're all Catholic, Boy.
Well, we have a break here. And now, folks, we want you to call in. Please make an observation. Call in. Let us hear you. And if we don't have enough, some people in the studio can be back in 2 minutes. Start to talk and start thinking. You got the Archbishop here. Put him on the spot. I mean, don't put him. We have our first caller this evening from John, but I want to ask him a minute because we want to take some recognition of the beatification of Cardinal Newman.
It's a week from today, isn't it?
A week from today.
Yeah, Benedict XVI will be in England.
I wish I was there.
Oh, you've always had a great devotion to Newman, haven't you?
Newman. And I long ago, I went to the house where Newman had set up a little religious house as an Anglican.
In Littlemore?
In Littlemore.
Yeah, and I've never been, but I've heard of it.
And there was an old lady there, Mrs. Green, and she said, "Now, my husband knew Mr. Newman. I never knew him myself, but there was any better man around here than Mr. Newman." So she says, "I call him Mr. Newman because I belong to the C.F.R, the Church of England.
Yeah.
They called him Mr. Newman."
Yeah.
And she's talking, and I said, "Newman is going to come down the corridor here." What a wonderful man. And
what's your favorite biography of Newman? You like Ian Kerr's?
No. The other one.
Muriel Trevor's?
Muriel Trevor's.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. There's great biographies out on Newman. What a great... Why is he so popular today? He'd be popular to Pope Benedict because of his towering intellectual ability, right?
But cor ad cor
loquitur. His
heart to heart.
Heart speaks to heart.
Newman has a great humanity. Even he's a great mind, but there's a great heart.
Yeah.
And he's sensitive. He doesn't get emotional, but it's powerful.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, he wrote music, he wrote poetry,
yes.
He wrote history. What's your favorite writing of his?
I suppose the Vita.
The Apologia,
his own life,
and his own. I love his plain and parochial sermons.
Oh yes,
you know and I think those were all from his Anglican
That's
days.
right.
But are they ever dynamite? And his dependence upon the fathers of the church.
Yeah.
So I'm eager to hear what the Holy Father has to say next Sunday in Birmingham when he beatifies him. It's a great day.
I would love to be there.
Yeah,
but our brothers who are in England and Ireland are going. Of course, everybody in England who's a Catholic, I think, is going to be in Birmingham.
Sure.
But remember Cardinal Newman, and I'm very happy. I've been praying to him for years. Now we can pray to him in public. Because he's blessed Newman.
Blessed John Henry Newman.
Now we have a call from John. You've been waiting. John, where are you from, and what is your question?
Father, I'm calling from Crystal, Minnesota, St. Raphael's Parish.
Good.
And first of all, I'd like to say thank you to yourself and to Archbishop Dolan for saying yes to God and to his church. And I'd like to just make a comment, and then I have a question. The first comment would be that I think there has to be a resurgence of grandparents and parents to affirm the priesthood and go out on a limb, if that's what you want to call it, and just ask young men or young women if they've considered religious life as an opportunity to get closer to God and give them the opportunity to just ponder it, if just for a moment. And I also think that altar serving with your father, your grandfather is a wonderful promotion of the priesthood also. And I think that I'm a member of the Sarah International, and I belong to the North Minneapolis Sarah Club, and we do something rather unique. And that is we take 8th grade boys and girls on vocational field trips to religious houses to get them the exposure and just plant seeds to let them know that there is something other than what the world is telling them they need to be. They have another opportunity to think of something else. So I was wondering if the question would be if you have any ideas that what Sarah could do better about not only supporting vocations but promoting them. Thank you, and I'll hang up. God bless you.
God bless you, John. What about, those are the kind of lay people we need, right?
Yes.
Sarah's a tremendous organization. You named after Unipeto Sarah, a Franciscan, and they're lay people that encourage vocations to the priesthood and religious life. I have the highest regard for Sarah International. John, the only thing I would ask him is when are they going to let the Yankees have Joe Mauer, the catcher for the Twins, and because we need him on the Yankees. We lost today, but the Giants won, and I blessed the new stadium. Pardon me for getting off the track here. No, there's a lot of. John brought up a good point, Father Benedict. You can do a lot of projects, and God bless you, John. Keep those up. The visiting the religious houses. Is there anything like a lay person? Yeah, we priests, sisters, kind of expected. Is there anything like a lay person happy in his or her faith saying to a young man, you'd make a good priest? That says the world. I've often talked about a culture of vocations. When I grew up, even the barber, who was not a Catholic, it was a pretty good Baptist, when Walt would cut my hair, like he'd say to any kid, what are you going to be when you grow up? And I'd say, well, I'm going to be a priest. And he'd say, hey, I like that. Good thing. Well, they have and the neighbors, and obviously the parishioners, the sisters, the priests, my family, yeah. But when I said I want to be a priest, people said, good shot, slugger. What a great way to spend your life. And that's a culture of vocation. And when it comes from a layperson, wow, it has tremendous I think, reverberation. So, John, keep up the good work. Sarah can do that. Projects are great, taking the kids to the seminary, to the rectories and all. But somebody, simply to see a Catholic man or woman say, have you ever thought about being a priest? I know of a bishop, Father Benedict, who made a young married couple his vocation directors for priesthood, not just for married life. And he said it was so powerful when a fine, young, happy married couple would go into a high school classroom and say, we want some of you guys to be a priest because we take our Catholic faith seriously and we need you. We need priests. And he said, did that ever have an impact? you know, if a guy, if I walk in or if you walk in, they're going to say, yeah, he's got to say that. You know, he's a priest, and not that we should refrain from doing it. We ought to do it more often. I'm telling our priests all the time, keep up the good work and getting into the classrooms and all. But when you got a dedicated, happy layperson saying it, wow. So, John, stay with it.
You know, though, there is something I want to say that's a little bit of a sour note here. And a lot of people who listen to this program are also priests and religious, members of religious orders, men and women. In the 80s and 90s, many religious communities practically fell apart. There is not much observance of religious life. The basic anthropological sign of a religious is religious clothing. Mm-hmm. I say that very pointedly. Religious order to live together.
By the way, who's our wardrobe consultant? You wore that same outfit last time I was on. What's going on?
All I got. And I wear it everywhere.
I did too, I think.
No, but we wear it on the street.
Sure.
All the friars wear our clothes in the street in New York City.
Sure.
No trouble.
Of course, you'd stand
all.
out. Nobody would stand out. I saw somebody walking down with robe and slippers the other day. Yeah. So you wouldn't. You'd look. You'd look like you were right out of a Saks window or something.
But the number. I meet many older men and women who are religious and are sincere people and leading the Christian life, but they are not leading the religious life. And that's too bad. Mm-hmm. And I think that they need to look seriously. What is religious life about? And if you read it, history, it means living together in common life, observance
prayer,
of poverty,
schedule,
chastity, mm-hmm. obedience,
precise
work,
apostolate, mm-hmm.
apostolate, and identifiable clothing. Mm-hmm. It doesn't have to be a medieval clothing, mm-hmm. But it should be. I was speaking to two sisters in very appropriate blue women's suit with a white blouse, a cross, and an emblem of their order mm-hmm. here. You know that they're sisters. Mm-hmm. That's a habit as far as I'm concerned, mm-hmm. right there. But it should be identifiable. And I hope and pray that it will come
You're
back.
on to something, Father, and that's not judging people who might not agree with us, but the young women are voting with their feet because the only orders that are getting vocations are those that kind of have gone back to allegiance with what you say, if what I hear is accurate.
We have several of our sisters of our community here tonight.
That's the third commercial you've given them during this show.
Sisters come from this country and then from England.
I know. We're proud of them. We love them. We love them. Their houses are tremendous.
Yes. Yeah. And the only trouble with our sisters' houses, they're crowded.
Isn't that great?
We have to open another place.
Is that a great problem to have? Yeah.
We have a call now from Julie. Julie, where you come from and what are you going to tell us?
I'm calling from Iowa. And I'm calling because, Father, I know, as everyone knows, that there's a lack of vocations to the priesthood and religious life. And I've heard many reasons as to the problem and why there is this lack of vocations. And I've thought about it at great length, and I am puzzled by one thing. We stand up in church every Sunday at the Prayer of the Faithful. Almost every Sunday we pray to God for vocations to the priesthood and religious life. And I believe Jesus hears those prayers. I also know that there are many couples in the church that are using artificial means of birth control. And my thought is that Jesus is answering our prayers for vocations and that the children that he wills to send into the world with a vocation are not being received. Humane Vitae was a powerful statement by a great pope, and I think Catholic couples need to think seriously. I see all sorts of problems with artificial birth control. I think it laid the foundation for abortion. But I think it also is a reason that we're lacking in vocations. And I'll listen to what you have to say about that.
Julie could be onto something. That's. I have heard people say. Julie spoke a little bit more deeply about some of the theological and philosophical problems, even sociologically. Father Benedict, when you've got 5, 6, 7 children, parents are going to be thrilled if one of them want to become a priest or a sister or brother. If you've got 1 or 2 children, which is more the norm today, and one of them says, "Oh, I think I'm going to be a nun or I'm going to be a priest," parents sometimes are saying, "Well, where are the grandkids going to come?" And it's very sad for me as a bishop when I remember I told you before, we bishops, Lord knows I'm not the only one. Every bishop today tries. If you hear about a young man or if a priest said, "Hey, I think this guy, if you called him, it would mean a lot," or if my vocation director, Father Sweeney, would say it, and I'll call and we'll have a good substantial talk. And then I'll say, "Well, I'll keep in touch, okay?" And they'll say, "Oh, okay, but if you call me at home, please don't identify yourself, because if my folks think I'm thinking about becoming a priest, they're going to be upset." That breaks your heart, doesn't it?
Yes.
That breaks your heart. So Julie could be onto something just sociologically with maybe an understandable, albeit regrettable, reluctance on the part of parents because of the smaller number of kids who would be less than enthusiastic about a child becoming a priest, brother, or sister. You agree or what?
Oh, absolutely. I'm the oldest of 6. And they were all born before I left to go novitiate at 17 in those days, believe it or not. And nobody ever brought up the question about, you're taking children away from the family. Nobody ever brought that up at all. In those days, to be a priest, even to go very early, everybody was with you. And by no means was it limited to Catholics. My Jewish friends, family friends, they were all so enthused that I was going to be a priest. And my Jewish friend, who was my spiritual guide when I was in high school, Mr. Graff. I have in a book coming out shortly called...
Hey, congratulations, by the way, on the Afterlife, the book on the Afterlife. Well done.
Thank you.
Yeah.
This is a new one, Visitors, Travelers Along the Road.
I've seen that. In fact, you were kind enough to ask me to write a blurb.
That's
People who have had an impact in your life.
And Mr. Graff.
I wasn't in it, but go ahead. I'm too young, I guess.
You're too young. Yeah. But Mr. Graff, I went in to say goodbye, and he had to use his accent, and he says to his beloved wife, he says, "Boy, I don't understand about monasteries, but be a good boy." It's a great piece of advice.
Sure.
And his dear wife came in, and the old people, not just Jewish, but Irish and Italian, Polish, they yelled at each other. You remember that?
Oh, yeah.
So, see, he says, "Ain't you going to say goodbye to Pete?" Not Pete. So where's he going? By the monastery. By the monastery. He's too young. I know. What do you want me to do? Knock him down? Sit on top of him? We have free country. We have separation of church and state. What do you want me to do? Lock him up. She says, "Shut up. Take him for a walk and explain about the bees and the birds." I laughed all the way through the novitiate, the bees and the birds. And they were dear and dear, lovable friends of ours. One of the things I often mention, in my growing up, it was a world of not just Catholics, but Protestants and Jews and a couple of Muslims. And we got along beautifully.
Yeah, religious concord,
in Jersey. And we had respect for other people's religion. Now somebody wrote to me a letter. It sounds like you accept all religions. I accept all people. And I admire people's looking after God as he may call them and give them that grace.
Sure.
Of course, I believe in the Catholic faith. But if a person to become a Catholic, you must have the grace of God to become a Catholic.
Sure, it's an invitation.
Otherwise, somebody talked you into it, and you won't stay.
Right.
You won't stay.
Yeah, free will's got to be part of it.
And let God call who God will call.
Yeah. I was glad Julie mentioned, though, about the grandparents, see? Because we talked about that earlier. I am really convinced on that. Grandparents have a... Father Benedict, it was in Easter of 1973, and I went to Russia. I was a student at the North American College, and we went to Russia as a group. And we were treated well because I was at the North American College, which was the Vatican, so they sort of welcomed us as this group from the Vatican. And when we got to visit a Russian Orthodox monastery, now this was religious oppression, so this monastery was harassed and under tight control. But we spoke with them in Latin. I couldn't do it today, but back then, we had a little bit more Latin. And we asked them, because of the religious oppression of the communism, how are the children taught the faith? Where's your catechisms? Where's your religious ed? Where are your schools? And they looked at us like we were crazy, and they said, well, what do you mean? Grandparents teach the kids their faith. And I thought, wow, they're the great army today, you know it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
Now we have one last call from Rita. Rita, you got about a minute and a half. So
Rita, where's Rita from?
Where are you from, Rita, and what's your question?
Well, thank you for taking my call. I'm from Ohio.
Midwest.
And I know several parishes close to where I am that have a lot of altar boys. They also have a lot of altar girls. So many girls that the boys are scheduled to serve maybe twice a year. They just can't get them on the schedules. I'm wondering about giving boys priority over girls in serving.
Well, I'd be the last person in the world that ever say, give the boys the priority. I understand being an acolyte. Originally, it was always an altar boy, which I was for many years. But I think it's beautiful that the girls are servers. And I have to tell you, they do a very
They do a good
nice
job. They're taking pride.
Yeah.
And I think the boys are even a little better because they're thinking. Now, here's what I notice when I go to a parish, and I say bravo, because Rita could be onto something with the kids aren't scheduled enough. When I go to parishes now, it's nothing to have like 12 or 15 servers, and I love it. And I'm thinking, now that could be because I'm coming, so they need somebody to hold the crozier and mitre and everything. But something tells me more and more parishes have the kids, you want them up there, darn it, close to the altar praying and taking part in the liturgy. It's a great way of keeping them close to the church. Not bad, Rita.
Well, we're all finished today.
We done already?
Yes, we're finished.
Man alive.
And God bless you in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen.
And as always, we ask you to help keep our EWTN on the television. And my good friend, Mother Angelica, will be hearing good news. We do need some more help. Because of the economic problems right now, we're down a bit. So if you can make a sacrifice, or you have a steady income, say if you're retired, please help EWTN. God bless.
Thanks, Father. Good to be with you.